Welcome, everybody, to this panel, which is about what I think everybody in the room would agree might be the world's scariest near-term, and maybe not just near-term, problem when we talk about food. Every issue that's being discussed here at the forum runs through this issue, whether it's climate, or war in Europe, or inflation, or the comeback from COVID, or disruption of globalization. And so we have an incredible panel here. And I want to just say, I think we should go down the line and hear from each person. What do they think? Which one of those, a range of issues, is the most important near-term issue in food? I'm David Rhodes. I'm the group director of Sky, based in London. Sky is the European division now of Comcast, the American media and telecom conglomerate. I'm a 2013 class of the Young Global Leader program for the forum, and here with the International Media Council. We have Raj Shah, who I've known since you were in the Obama administration, now president of Rockefeller. Good to have you with us. Claire Akamanzi, CEO of the Rwanda Development Board. Welcome. Hanneke Faber, we have found we have a couple of things in common. She is a division president of Unilever. And Theo de Jager, the president of the World Farmers Organization. So welcome. We've got multiple continents, multiple perspectives represented. Why don't we go down the line of all those things that we're concerned with right now? Just in a few words, what is the most pressing? What's the worst problem for food right now?
Well, maybe you want me to start? I'll start with a number, which is 48. And in 2007, 8, and 9, during the last major global food crisis, there were 48 moments of significant political violence and political instability as a result of spikes in food prices. Many people are aware of the link between that reality and the emergence of the Arab Spring. Many people are aware of the mass migration and the extreme human suffering and political instability caused by food crisis. And at the end of the day, food and its availability, its quantity and quality are critical to the maintenance of stability around our planet. So my biggest concern, frankly, is that we are just starting a food crisis that is far worse than 2007, 8, and 9. And that by the time we get to August, September, October, what we all know as the hungry season, and we can go into why it's referred to that way, that we will see the consequences of this food crisis in the terms of political instability, mass migration, famine in certain parts of the world. And the only other introductory comment I'd make is, because we've been through this so many times before, we actually know how to prevent the worst consequences. And more importantly, we know how to invest in the prevention of these types of crises causing human suffering and political instability around our planet. And yet, crisis after crisis after crisis, we often fail to take those actions. So I look forward to learning from my colleagues here about what works and investing in those efforts in a much more significant way so that our future is not so vulnerable to, a war in Ukraine, or a drought in East Africa.
Claire, your biggest concern?
I'm worried about the impact of food prices on the momentum that we were already achieving as a country, but also as a continent. If you look at the gains we had made on food security, Rwanda, for example, had attained food security. Millions of people had been taken away from poverty, and we were seeing those gains. with the current food prices that we're seeing, recently we saw a 16% increase in food prices in Rwanda. We saw a 121% increase in fertilizers. That's going to impact productivity. It's going to impact food security. It's going to impact livelihoods because purchasing power is going to be affected in a country that was still addressing issues of poverty. I'm worried about what that means in terms of going back on some of the gains we had made on poverty and also food security. And so looking at that, and also what it would mean to even undo the gains that we'll have lost, I think would be a very difficult challenge.
Undoing those gains, undoing those gains. Hanneke, your biggest concern.
Yeah, I mean, I will echo them. I think we have a possibly unimaginable food crisis right in front of us. And when food fails, societies fail, and we all fail. I think the hopeful thing is we know what to do. My biggest concern is, will we do it fast enough? So hopefully we'll talk about that.
Hopefully. Theo?
Yeah, I want to echo what all the other speakers said. What I fear most is that people are looking to the farmers to solve the problem. We can produce more on less and with less, but we simply don't have the means to do so in the current circumstances. The risk we are exposed to because of climate, because of the financial environment, the energy, the prices of our inputs, fertilizers, diesel, agrochemicals, a farmer would now think 3 times before he makes the investment. So it's not only us who can solve this problem. We need a team, and we need it quickly.
Right. You can't do it yourself. Yeah. There's a UN suggestion this week that here at the forum that 1.7 billion will face food insecurity this year. A credible Eurasia Group report puts the number higher, 1.9. We're going to take questions from our audience here as we go, and no Slido. It's an intimate enough room. We'll be able to get everybody involved. I'll be able to see you. It'll be my fault if you don't get called on. And we're being live streamed. What I'm hearing, though, as a unifying theme here, as concerned as we might be in the news agenda with Ukraine, our organization led this week with the situation at the port in Odessa, getting the harvest out. But what I'm hearing is that pricing, the inflationary context of the inputs post-COVID, of what people in the street face, that's really what's going to tip us over into that insecurity this year. Maybe, Claire, talk about that from 15 to 20% increase. I mean, your government, many governments must be concerned about civil unrest in a situation like that as we go into that season. What's the feeling out there?
Well, for us as a government, what we're thinking is, these are challenges that are real and they're happening globally. The key thing is to bring all the parties together, starting with the people that are going to be affected, those that are going to be paying high prices, those that are already feeling the pain, getting them to understand what's going on and some of the solutions that we have. So I think engaging the people and the public and community and really sharing the truth of what's happening and what we have to grapple with. I think for us that has been very important. But also trying to intervene as government to get safety nets, social programs that can really support those that have been most affected. That's something that we're doing also as a country, and I think that's very important to do that now. But I think more importantly is to think about how do you increase local production for Rwanda or for Africa. And in Africa, we always talk about 60% of the world's arable land is in the African continent, but we're not utilizing it. We're relying on wheat or other products from somewhere. It's a crisis, but how do we learn from this crisis and how do we fix some of these problems that we've had? Recently, Rwanda signed an agreement with the World Bank, a $300 million agreement to try and finance some of these things that we're talking about. How do you de-risk agriculture? How do you support farmers? And we have everything that it takes in Africa. We just need to put everything together to make it work.
I mean, what I hear from Theo is that even where we have land and cultivation, we've got problems on those input prices. But I guess there's more land to put into cultivation where that came from, is your point.
Yeah, but then we cannot waste this crisis and just keep farming the way we've always done, because this crisis is bigger than the Ukraine imports. This crisis has been building for a long time. Climate change is a big part of it, droughts, floods, which means we have to farm differently. And this is a great time to start farming differently. We call it regenerative agriculture. It has to come to many more acres, many more crops, many more regions around the world. And as businesses, we have a responsibility to fund and scale that transition, because the farmer cannot do that on his own. And we've got good examples. So if I might quote one that's been in place between Unilever, ADM, and the farmers of Iowa for 5 years now. Soybean farming, you know, we're a big seller of mayonnaise, Hellmann's, soybeans. Soybean farming is not great for the soil, it's very mechanized. So water runs off, the soil deteriorates. So we started with 100 farmers in 2017 to see if we could farm differently, to reduce emissions, to reduce water pollution, to improve soil health.
Your company points out, that it takes 1 to 4 centuries to have soil that's suitable for this.
It all starts with the soil. So started with 100 farmers. We measured it, University of Iowa measured it, and after 5 years, we're seeing reduced emissions, less pollution, higher yields. It can be done. Again, with, of course, leadership of the farmers of Iowa, transitional funding from ADM, from us. We'd love to see more from governments to enable this as well. It can be done. It's not rocket science, but it has to be done on many more crops, many more countries now if we're going to avert this crisis.
Raj, you and I met in coverage of politics, and it's ironic how everything comes back to Iowa in that context. But you probably, what is the role for NGOs and for multinational, for global institutions in this? I mean, we've got a government perspective, we've got a corporate perspective. I think people probably look at the sector and think that, you know, philanthropy isn't big enough to get us through this.
Well, philanthropy is certainly not big enough to get us through this. What we can do is sort of highlight the path forward and try to lift up and listen to the voices like Claire that basically just gave us the roadmap to solve the crisis. And that roadmap has, I think, 3 basic components right now. The first is we need aggressive humanitarian action now, informed by all the science and innovation that we've put into place over 40, 50 years to improve the effectiveness of that humanitarian action. For example, Rockefeller and Grow Intelligence, a data and AI company, launched a tool that allows us to visualize vulnerability in terms of this crisis going forward. We know, and we knew before Ukraine was invaded, we knew where the hotspots were going to be. Now we know with real precision where the hotspots are likely to be in terms of people starving and real political instability from food crises later this year. We can pre-position food, we can get NGOs in there, we can support the World Food Program to have the resources it needs, we can work with local producers and governments to protect people in those communities and reduce the pressures on migration, violence, unrest that may result from real acute hunger later this year. That's number 1. Number 2 is what Claire said, which is we should be investing aggressively in social safety nets. And the truth is, the whole development enterprise, the countries themselves, the World Bank and other similar institutions and NGOs have learned a lot about how to provide meaningful social protection to communities that are vulnerable. We know how to reach children. We know how to reach pregnant women. We know how to run school feeding programs. We know which of those programs are likely to be most protective at times of crisis. And right now, because countries are facing a fiscal crisis from rising interest payments on debt, from increased fuel costs, and increased food costs from the prices you just mentioned, they don't have the fiscal capacity to invest in those protection programs when they are needed. We should have a massive global effort. This should be part of a G7, it should be part of a G20, but right now we need much, much bigger push in that area. The final area is, again, what Claire said, is help farmers. We know that helping farmers works to increase local production. When I was part of the Obama administration, we launched, and we've talked about, Feed the Future. Feed the Future works in Rwanda and 19 other countries. It's no magic. We work with local leaders like Claire and farmers that are represented throughout the country, mostly small-scale and medium-sized farmers. And in fact, they have improved their yields, they've improved their production, and the 19 Feed the Future countries are actually more resilient to this crisis because of effectively 7-8 years of real investment. Another example is AGRA, the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa. AGRA has reached, it reaches about 11 million farmers in about a dozen countries in Africa on an annual basis. About half of those farmers have improved their adoption of fertilizers and inputs like improved seeds, all local, all very sustainably done. And the result has been they've increased their yields from about 1.2 tons per hectare to 2.5 tons per hectare. That, I mean, Claire, you tell us, what difference does that make for a family and for a community when you double yields from that low of baseline? I mean, in America, yields are what, 10 tons per hectare, and in Europe, they're probably 8 or 9. Africa is one of the few places where you still have a lot of farming that's only producing 1 or 1.5 tons per hectare. So we know these efforts work. We know they're incredibly powerful. We need to invest in them more, and we have to use this crisis to actually solve this problem.
But as part of what we did, and I say just we in terms of here we are at the forum, we're trying to get a handle on these issues from sort of 37,000 feet. But in globalizing many of these systems that we're now talking about how that feeds back to the farmer, we also specialized very highly. So Hanneke, you talk about specialized agriculture in terms of how we grow soy, but we specialized in other ways, that so much fertilizer comes from one country, that so much grain to support subsidized bread comes from another country. Did we over-specialize in terms of the food chain?
You know, food security no longer means that any country produce everything it consumes, or the other way around, that it consumes everything it produces. In the modern world, food security means that you need to produce enough of that in which you have a competitive advantage, so that you can exchange for that in which you do not have a competitive advantage. You must stick to your guns. You must produce that which you are good at and which your area supports. And that boils the question down to trade.
Right.
The trade must flow. Where we are sitting here today, there is still enough food in the world. There is enough that we can afford to waste about 30 to 35% of the food that leaves the farm gate.
And we do.
We are not sure that it will still be the case in 10 months from now. We don't know whether farmers will be able, under the current conditions, to produce what we need. But the playing fields must then be leveled. It must be easier to move food and fiber across borders. We cannot allow inputs, agricultural inputs, fertilizers, diesel, and food to be used as a weapon of war. We must go beyond that. And I know it's an uncomfortable thing, and I got criticized for this here in Davos, but I have a bleeding heart for the farmers in Russia. You know, we cannot create a new humanitarian crisis on that side. And somehow we must address the cause of our problem now. The cause is not only this war. We already had sky-high fertilizer prices during COVID. Farmers are still reeling from the impact which COVID had in the disruption of their markets. But now, with this war, we must simply get it to an end somehow. I was reading Montgomery's autobiography last week, and he says about the Second World War, but this war could have stopped 2 years earlier. Millions less lives lost if total surrender was not the goal of it. And as farmers, we are not politicians, we are not scientists, we are not academia. We are looking to leadership to go there and address this issue and see what we can do to normalize things, or else, you know, Martin Suskind, the German philosopher, says, imagine there's a war and nobody goes there. Then it will come to you. And you will no longer have the option where to fight it. It will come to your yard, to your veranda, to your kitchen, and to your bedroom. I think that the time has come from our perspective as farmers to go to the war and to try to bring a meaningful end to it. Everybody talk about the consequences of it. But it cannot be that hard to get to an amicable solution to the war.
Well, Claire, Theo may not be a politician, although that was fairly rousing political speech. So, I don't know, maybe after the farming thing. But Claire, you are a political figure, and if I can say, in a country with very real experience of needing reconciliation from a violent conflict. So how do you respond to this idea that at a certain point, you just need to draw a line under it because one side does not get total victory?
Well, I think for us in Rwanda, what we learned from the genocide against the Tutsis that happened was nobody won, everybody lost. Whether you're a victim or perpetrator, or everybody lost. And so in everything that we do, we always think about bringing everybody on the table. And that's why I said engaging even those that are suffering, you know, from the current food prices. They need to know that there's a problem we're grappling with together. We're not pointing fingers, but we're going to sit together and knock our heads together to find a solution. But back to your question, did we over-specialize? I think we did. And I think that Africa lost out in that over-specialization, and Africa has the potential to be part of the solution and to think about diversifying sources of supplies or sources of inputs. And I think for us as an African continent, this is the time to really challenge ourselves to rise up, to really find or be part of the solutions. And as we think about some of the innovations that are being discussed today, you talked about regenerative agriculture, climate smart agriculture, all these innovations, new seed varieties, who's thinking about those? I think we also want to position ourselves in the African continent as being one of those places that you can try these innovations and test them. And Rwanda in particular, we like to position ourselves as a proof of concept country. We don't have all the solutions. You have some of the innovations. Are you looking for a place to test them? Let's test them together. We'll give you a country, we'll give you a place, we'll give you a commitment as a government, and we'll bring the resources that we have together to test and prove those concepts. And if they work very well, let's scale them to the rest of the world.
For knowledge transfer too, in order to learn more about that. I mean, is that the most?
Yeah, I love that. I think on the one side, it's a pipe dream to think any country on this planet can be food sufficient, self-sufficient. Even the US, which is the most self-sufficient country, is not self-sufficient. So trade and borders must stay open if we're going to feed everyone. That said, in Africa, we have a big opportunity to produce and manufacture more food in Africa for Africa. And we love working with Rwanda, where we did a big tea collaboration together. We're now working on finger millet, which you may have never heard of, but
I had some of that this morning.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. But we eat too many of the same crops. We're working on finger millet in Kenya. Africa can be a real lab, and we've got to do more in Africa for Africa.
But would you say from a sort of multinational perspective, is it a current reality or is it more of an aspiration?
It's increasingly a reality. So if I look back even 2 or 3 years, we were only doing about 40% of our materials that we sell in Africa came from Africa. We're now at about 65. So we've really made a step change. And it was, of course, kind of silly. You don't bring eggs from France to sell mayonnaise in Africa. So we don't do that anymore.
All right, we must have some questions from our group because I think we've had a few provocative perspectives. So let's start right here in the front. Oh, and we have microphones. We've thought of everything.
Hello, thank you. My name is Adam, and I'm a global shipper from Cotonou in Benin. I would like once again to raise the awareness about the fact that food is now becoming the #1 priority when it comes to geopolitics. And regarding to that, having 60% of the arable land I would like to know what you think about how, as African, can, and I'm happy Theo brought it up, can increase or enhance intra-trade among ourselves in order to be self-sufficient and then maybe be the solution for this crisis. Thank you.
Can I respond to that?
Theo.
Often the most beautiful things are born in times of crisis. And with every cell in my body, I hope that this crisis will spark the food production revolution in Africa. Africa has everything which money cannot buy. The land, the water, the climate, the people. What it lacks is things that money can buy. Infrastructure, linkages to markets, mechanization, modernization. We need to commercialize agriculture in Africa, and we need to mechanize it and bring the latest technology to the youngsters. Over the last few years, I've seen young people going back to farms when it is profitable. If it is not profitable, they want to run away from it. And the profitability came with digitalization. It became with connectiveness, when they could look for markets and see what the market wants and find ways to get it there. Nothing makes me more excited about a new generation of young farmers in Africa who are stepping forward and taking control of the challenges of competitiveness.
If I could add to that,
please.
I think also to increase inter-African trade, I think investment is an enabler of trade. So to be able to trade within Africa, we need to see more investments within Africa and across Africa. And we do already see inter-African trade supporting that. We have investments, for example, in a big part from South Africa, from Kenya, from North Africa, Morocco, Egypt, among others. So I think being able to really make it easy to do business within the African continent, so we have more investments coming in. Those investments will unlock inter-African trade.
Who's supposed to lead that investment? Because I'm hearing that it's a technology issue, it's a mechanization maybe issue. Is that a sort of multinational sector? Is that require sort of government or extra governmental coordination? Who's supposed to do it?
I think it's innovative partnerships. Actually, the World Economic Forum has these innovation hubs which enable government, NGOs, business, farmers. Should have started with the farmers to get together and come up with these partnerships, because it has to be all of us. It cannot be just a farmer or just a business.
Raj?
I think the role of trade certainty in this context is hugely important, because it's very hard to have either domestic investment or foreign direct investment in commercial agriculture
If the rules are unclear.
If the rules are unclear. And just to put it in perspective, right now as we speak, I think 30 countries have instituted export bans of different commodities during this crisis, compounding the fact that 30% of the world's wheat for trade is stuck in Ukraine, and 20% of the world's nitrogen for fertilizers is stuck in Russia. And that just makes matters worse. So when the Indian government pulls its wheat off the global market, or the Indonesian government pulls its palm oil off the global market, it's exacerbating a crisis. And those actions, which speak to a real domestic fear about will we have food to feed ourselves right now, will actually come back and undermine the global system's resilience in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. So we have to avoid this, and there needs to be much more of a political agreement to have trade certainty in order to both get through the crisis and to enable more direct investment in agriculture.
But Theo, in a way, controversially speaking up for the Russian farmer here, you're saying, look, these kinds of, there's harms all around. So, look, we could have had a defense minister join our panel today to talk about the challenge of getting Ukraine's harvest out through Odessa. But I suppose it goes further than that, too, in terms of we talk about not buying Russian gas, Russian oil, but to the degree that we don't buy the harvest from there, is that what's the pain point? When you're saying you're speaking up for that incremental farmer in the East? What are we doing wrong?
They must be able to produce. There must still be food in Russia too. We are not going to wish away Russia. A country is not only its political leaders, it's their people too. And it's the biggest profession in Russia. It's the biggest profession in the world. There are more farmers than there are in any other profession. And they are often the poorest. They are often the most food insecure. Russia is not a country of mega farmers and corporate farmers. It's a country also of smallholders. They are a member of the World Farmers Organization, and they make valuable contributions in the development of policies in both Europe and in Asia. We still take medicines there. The USA is still taking medicines there and stuff. So I want to plea for food to be able to cross borders, and that we not cause a hunger disaster, which later will become a global disaster anyway. It's not their problem, it will be a problem of all of us.
It'll be our problem. Richard, I think you were next.
So David,
and we got a microphone for you, maybe there.
thank you. To what extent is trade protectionism? So, for example, the classic, French farmers are protected and keep the prices high so you maintain supply of milk or, whatever it is. If those went away in an ideal world, are we a lot better off, and how does that happen politically?
No, I think repurposing agricultural subsidies is a huge theme around the world, and it needs to happen. Still too much of, Europe's giant agricultural cap budget goes to practices that are not sustainable. And the EU, to their credit, has made progress on repurposing subsidies, but it's far from being done. And this is the same in India, and it's the same in the United States and various other markets. So that needs acceleration, because otherwise, again, we're creating our own crisis.
The cap has been litigated in this and other forums since anyone can remember, and it predates many of these international organizations. But you're saying it's still a very present danger to the system.
Absolutely, absolutely. Again, progress has been made, but more progress needs to be made. And for example, right now the EU is debating Fit for 55, which is their CO2 reduction target, and what plans they need to do to actually meet that target. It's all about energy. Regenerative agriculture isn't even mentioned. So that needs to change.
Regenerative agriculture, carbon capture, soil.
And repurposing subsidies towards those practices.
So it's too much, you'd say it's too much toward mobility and...
Well, we need those things too, but if we're going to be net zero, which the EU has said they will, we need agriculture to play a massive role.
Third row, and then we'll come over here.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Khadim Al-Darai. I am the chairman of Al-Dahra Agriculture based in Abu Dhabi. What I hear today, like what we heard in 2008. And actually in UAE, in 2006, we have felt the pressure of the importance of the food security stability. And we are in the region in the Middle East where we don't have enough water and we don't have fertilized land. So what we have decided, we have decided to outsource the product from the globe. And we have shortlisted many countries. And that shortlisting based on water availability, investment, encouragement, and accessibility. What we have seen since then, three major factors that really affecting the food security. One is availability, which is not the case this year. The other one, accessibility, which is more or less was since the pandemic. And the third one, affordability, which is extremely the case nowadays.
I think affordability too, not to interrupt, but that's what led our process up here. You're putting those other two maybe ahead.
Yes, but no, today the affordability is the issue, the case. Many countries today, they don't have, and this is the challenge that is coming, mainly if you look at Sri Lanka, Egypt, and other countries and African countries, they are suffering, and there is less of credit facilities to afford or to provide for such hikes in commodities. Now, when this crisis happens, we see a lot of government intervention, a lot of thought and discussion. But what we have done in UAE, the government has taken a firm decision, long-term commitment. And they have asked the private sector to look at opportunities where and how they can mitigate that risk not to happen every year. Every single country, either rich or poor, they have a budget to buy that product. But if they have allocated and used that money wisely by vertically integrating or creating sort of in-kind investment in the countries where they are friendly or they are neighboring, and they focus their effort to produce and to create solutions, sustainable solutions, this would have not solved the problem, but probably it will eliminate when the crisis happens. Now, you know, nobody doubts Black Sea is the main source of grains. Russia, Ukraine, Romania, and this part of the world, beside the west part of Europe. No one had thought this problem would happen, and this net availability, I cannot blame the farmers. The farmers actually the more victims than anybody else,
well,
because they have, they have put money and they are suffering. They are suffering from the energy input cost, energy fertilizer, but also now they don't have the room to sell, and even they don't have the access to the cash to harvest or to buy fertilizer. So they are in big trouble. Consumers, they really cannot afford today the price. So who to blame?
Well, so is your question who to blame? What's your question for the panel?
Actually, my question,
I want to come up
my question,
yeah.
It is the responsibility on the government to really know exactly how they can mitigate the risk. Because the problem happens when there are some countries, they banned the export, so they must be responsible. Knowing that.
Let me ask it in this way, and then I want to get to our next question here. Maybe the question is, governments try to mitigate risks to a degree. Sometimes those are beyond their capability. So, for instance, we talk, I think, in an individual European government context about how the consumer will deal with inflation. I mean, at a certain point, if you're facing a global inflation situation, there's only limited levers to pull. What are the levers that, to our friend's point, should have been pulled? I mean, if we can do a little bit of hindsight here, what do we miss?
I can name one.
Yeah.
You know, we just are emerging from, in some parts of the world, not fully emerging from a global pandemic that's been obviously a multi-year crisis. Through that pandemic, wealthier nations pulled the lever of fiscal stimulus and often targeted social protection in the context of fiscal stimulus. In fact, those countries put between 25 and 30% of GDP into an effort to sustain the economy through the crisis. Developing countries did about 2% of GDP, and emerging economies did about 6% of GDP, so larger emerging economies. So we're already, the lever that they need to pull, that they're not able to pull, is basically public investment in immediate social protection.
Like everybody took care of their own.
Everyone took care of their own. And then these countries, and on top of that, we now have a global inflation problem that is causing interest rates to go up appropriately. But it's the developing and emerging economies that have by far the greatest multiple of interest rate increases, and therefore even more debt sustainability burdens. 60% of the developing countries in the world are facing immediate debt sustainability crises at a time when they're also facing a food and fuel crisis. So they're missing the lever of social protection, which everyone else in the world used to get their populations through a crisis. And that's a solvable problem, but it takes global cooperation and more money.
Let's get here in the second row while we've still got a bit of time. Your question.
Thank you. My name is Evgenia. I'm from Ukraine. I'm a global shaper. I would like to put it this way. I'm really surprised how the discussion is going on here, because especially on the question of whom to blame, because we have an answer to whom blame, because Ukraine is not the country whom we should blame for that, right? Russia is invaded Ukraine. She is blocking Russia. Odessa and Black Sea, but also I'm really surprised how we are putting the question of whether Russia will be on hunger. Believe me, Russia won't be on hunger. There is already an evidence that Russia is stealing the gain in the amount preliminary, according to the Ukrainian Defense Ministry, of 400,000 tons of gain. So, and translated and transported to the Syrian.
You mean sending east what we're not seeing coming out of the port, or sending west?
So, say again?
You're saying sending that harvest east that we're not seeing
east. We are not seeing it. It's already on CNN. We already have a satellite proof that Russians shipping from Sevastopol, as the Crimea itself doesn't have the capacity to make an agriculture in that big amount. So basically, that's the harvest that was stolen in Ukraine. So the case is we have 2 million tons of gain now in Ukraine, saved in Ukraine, but we need to burn it. We will need to burn it. It will not deliver it somewhere, right? Yeah. So don't you think that this discussion should go in a way how we can help Ukraine to deliver it to Africa, to Asia, to Europe, to any other country, rather than saying who we should blame, because we already have an answer for that, and saying whether Russia will be on hunger. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And food is being used as a weapon of war here, which the UN has condemned, and we know by who. I think you're absolutely right. We in partnership need to do whatever we can to create corridors to get the crops out of the Ukraine. And hopefully there will be some sea corridors, but in the meantime, we need land corridors on steroids. And the EU did actually a good job during COVID to create these green lanes for food when borders were closed. We need something similar urgently to get more land transport out of Ukraine.
I think too, what's being pointed out is the trade point, that harvest getting out of those silos, getting shipped to customers which Ukraine has developed, that's trade. And maybe the alternative to trade is just theft, is that it's just, sent back east.
The Ukrainian farmers are very resilient. They are tough. I visited Hungary about a month ago, and I asked whether there would be any possibility to meet with Ukrainian farmers. Now, it was not possible. The men are not allowed to come across the border, but I met with their families, with their wives, and they are planting. They put on bulletproof vests and they are planting. They are planting for a harvest in the western part of Ukraine for 30 million tons. And it struck me how tragic the situation of a farmer is in a war. They are always the last to leave because somebody needs to feed the livestock and give water to them. Somebody needs to do the irrigation. They always hang on there too long. But it anchors a lot of stability in that region. In Ukraine itself, we do not get the messages from the farmers who say, but we are running out of the means to produce. We are running out of food ourselves. The crisis with the Ukrainian farmers is that they cannot get their products out now, and they cannot get the money for their products. So they cannot afford to buy. I know that a number of the big corporations, Unilever, yesterday we met with some of the captains of industry in the fertilizer and the seed businesses who say that they are sending, the one company sent 200 trucks of seed into the Ukraine so that they can go on to plant. And this is why I tried to put the light on the plight of those Russian farmers. Because one of these days the war will be over, and then we need to have a foundation from which to build again.
We're going to have to close this out, but just to send us home, Claire, you've got an announcement today coordinated with the World Economic Forum, and maybe send us home with what you've agreed today.
Yeah. Thank you, David. I think what we've had today, you know, from Raj, from Hanneke, from even the farmers, is collaboration and partnership is extremely important. We need platforms where collaboration and partnerships can happen to find solutions. This is where I'm very excited about the new partnership that we have with the World Economic Forum, with industries such as Rabobank, which is the Food Action Alliance, a platform that we'll be hosting in Rwanda and co-leading in Rwanda. And that's where we hope to really tackle these issues. How do we achieve all these solutions that we want? How do we address climate issues? How do we address farmers and livelihoods? How do we bring better prices to farmers? All these issues that need to be addressed. It's an important platform, and I'm really looking forward to the Food Action Alliance that will be responding to this.
Thank you. Thanks to everyone on the panel. Thanks to everyone participating in the room. Good luck.